Let's talk about Sea of Stars. First of all, I really enjoyed the spectacle. Sabotage has made a beautiful game with an outstanding soundtrack. It's a real achievement. The combat system is simple enough, but hides some complexity that the experienced player can exploit, and there's plenty of side quests to keep you busy before sprinting to the finish line. But there's a few things that I feel really hold it back from being truly great, and again, this is just how I feel about the game. And from talking to a few fans, I can tell that some of my opinions are definitely those of the minority. But let's not beat about the bush. This critique will contain spoilers right off the bat. Hi, Future Dupu here. While I was editing this, I realised it's a really long, rambly thing that doesn't make any sense if you haven't played Sea of Stars, so if you haven't done that, go ahead and do that and then come back. It's only a short 45 hours or so. See you soon. When talking about Sea of Stars, it's important to remember the games it's paying homage to, Chrono Trigger being the clearest by far. Certainly there's elements of other games, especially things like the rhythm action element of RPG combat systems, which appear prominently in games like Paper Mario or Shadow Hearts. One perhaps less obvious influence is the silent protagonist of Chrono. And the reason it's not so obvious is that our lead characters, Valere and Zale, speak. But like Chrono and many other RPG protagonists of his generation, this story is not about them. Not really. To understand this, we need to establish what the story of Sea of Stars actually is. We have our protagonists, chosen ones who leave their village on a quest to defeat the supposed final dweller of their world, an entity eventually capable of world-ending destruction. Pretty much immediately after setting out, they're joined by their childhood friend Garl. After some adventures, largely mediated by Garl, they meet another character called Serai, and eventually find themselves facing down the dweller. Unfortunately, their predecessors, Brugaves and Erlina, betray them, cutting a deal with the minions of the Big Bad, the Fleshmancer, to escape from the endless cycle of risking their lives fighting dwellers. There's some more adventuring, the party meets Resh'an, this great alchemist and part of the reason the plot's happening. He helps them reach Mesa Island where they fight another dweller. After the fight, Serai accidentally attracts the attention of the Fleshmancer, Garl is mortally wounded, but he's given some borrowed time to fulfill his destiny. Which he does, and then dies. Then the party's able to cross the Sea of Stars. There, the party learn that they've reached Serai's planet, which has been conquered by the Fleshmancer's minions. They free the planet, and the game is basically over. In this very terse summary, you'll notice the names Serai and Garl appear more often than Valere and Zale. That's because the Solstice twins operate primarily as a plot device used by other characters. They have virtually no personality of their own. Valere is a little more severe, maybe, and Zale has this strange habit of laughing uncontrollably whenever Garl says something. Ha 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 ha. That's it. And that's fine, actually. I mean, again, this is where we can draw that parallel between Chrono Trigger's Chrono and our player characters. Provided the rest of the cast have fulfilling character arcs, we can largely overlook Valere and Zale. Sure, there's a missed opportunity there, but again, if we view Sea of Stars through this Chrono Trigger homage lens, we can forgive this. But, all the way up to his death, Garl is the actual point of view character. He does virtually all of the speaking and decision making, his prophecy is the key to crossing the Sea of Stars, he keeps morale high when things get bad. He's a great guy. Actually, he's too great a guy. He's so great a guy, the moment he was introduced, I said out loud, this guy's definitely going to die later. Garl demonstrates no negative traits outside of the crime of caring too much about his friends. There's no growth for Garl because everyone he meets immediately finds him affable. He founds a village off the back of this affability. He soothes a dragon by baking bread. Eventually, we find out that he has made pals with the gods of the underworld. The character had nowhere to go but down, which is a brilliant setup that isn't used. My second prediction for Garl would have been that he turned out to be the Fleshmancer in some form. Yeah, that would have been a bit hack-and-eyed, but I would suggest it's still better than what actually happened with Garl and his complete lack of development. Because Garl is perfect, we, the player, are expected to be upset when he dies. But we've not been on a journey with him, not like a character journey at least. He's been the guy who has constantly talked over our protagonists, stifling their ability to express their own characters while suffering virtually no consequences for any rash actions he took. Honestly, the most satisfying part of Garl's development was his bookend death. What I mean by that is when Garl was introduced, he dove in front of his friends to prevent a monster from attacking them and suffered a lifelong injury for it. Later on, that same flaw, caring for his friends too much, would come back and kill him. That's actually good writing. The character was static, did not overcome their fatal flaw, and died for it. So imagine how disappointed I was when the time came to unlock the game's true ending. In true Chrono Trigger style, Garl is replaced with Beast at the time of his death and is saved. Hooray! But this doesn't change anything in any meaningful way. The ending plays out almost exactly the same as before, except Erlena's life is spared by the Solstice Warriors and Garl gets to live. Erlena surviving is arguably a broken Aesop in itself, given how she betrayed her entire world and then got everything she wanted out of it. A safe life for her and Brugaves. Bringing back Garl cheapened his death and the impact it was meant to have on the story even more than the total damp squib that it already was. So, we have Garl, a character whose personality doesn't evolve over time, who is almost universally beloved in-universe, whose interactions make the presence of Valere and Zale redundant in most cases, reducing them to glorified props, who dies, supposedly giving our protagonists room to express themselves, but later returns, rendering the whole dying thing moot. As difficult as it would have been to write, having Garl grow into that leadership role and share the spotlight with his friends would have really helped me personally care about the character. I'm not even saying that he needed to stay dead in that case, but bringing him back needed to have some kind of meaning. But for that period where he's dead, at least Valere and Zale finally get their time to shine, right? Right? No, not really. Once Garl dies and the Dweller is removed from their world, the story of Valere and Zale's planet is effectively over. It's not yet safe, strictly speaking, but all the threats have retreated to Serai's world. Serai functions similarly to Frog in Chrono Trigger from a narrative standpoint. She failed to protect her planet and seeks revenge or retribution against the Fleshmancer. Unfortunately, she doesn't really have a character arc either. She has an undercover identity as Captain Cliché, but otherwise her dark and brooding nature stays pretty much constant throughout the game. When it was revealed she was actually a cyborg, the reaction I gave was a resounding, yeah, sure. Unlike Garl, Serai has a real personality flaw to overcome. She's driven purely by the desire to free her planet from oppression. Seeing a similar fate potentially befall Valere and Zale's planet causes her to act out and throw Resh'an's hourglass at a Dweller. Again, this is good writing. It showcases her nature and has the consequence of killing Garl. Outside of the first few moments of her actually doing this, no one calls her out on it, and her rash behaviour is never resolved. It would have been interesting to see her nearly doom her own planet by failing to learn from her mistakes, or more optimistically, watch her learn from said mistakes and avoid further catastrophe. Because the back third of Sea of Stars takes place primarily on Serai's world, it becomes her story, further causing problems for Valere and Zale's characterization. This is especially true after Resh'an removes himself from the plot, leaving Serai as the only character really talking for the party. Speaking of Resh'an, he's his own kettle of fish. As the primary plot driver of Sea of Stars, there were a lot of opportunities to watch him evolve. But again, he suffers from an agonizingly static character. When the cast meet him, he secluded himself in his tower as the archivist, presumably only venturing out to deliver solstice babies or whatever the Great Eagle does. Remorseful, that his actions eventually created the constant struggle across parallel universes that motivate the entire plot of the game, he agrees to help the party in non-dweller related adventures. So, great! We already have a hook for his development. He just needs to eventually realise that breaking the status quo is more important than upholding the system that causes countless worlds to fall to the Fleshmancer's minions. Right? Right. When Resh'an finally gets involved, it's not by his own choice. Serai makes the choice for him by throwing his hourglass at a dweller. At this point, Resh'an kind of throws up his hands and goes, okay, whatever, and tags along, eventually producing Beast and then piecing out of the plot after finding out the Fleshmancer has been evil for far longer than he thought. He leaves behind a puppet which has even less personality than Valerian's Ale. So, what was Resh'an's character arc again? He half-heartedly joins the heroes, makes things worse, save for keeping Garl alive, but let's also remember he's part of the reason Garl died in the first place, manages to create living glass, and then narratively leaves the game. Given his role in the grand scheme of things, it would have been fine for him to step on Valerian's Ale in terms of interacting with similarly grand characters, which he does, but less so than Garl, incredibly. But this is yet another character with no development. His fatal flaw, his unwillingness to breach the contract he made with his friend, is never resolved, and just causes problem after problem for the universe at large. I'm waiting for someone in the comments to tell me I'm wrong about Resh'an's characterization, and honestly, I would like to be told that. Resh'an's an interesting character, but I just don't understand why he was used in the way he was during the events of the game. When RPGs are largely about disrupting systems, it's subversive but also bizarre to see an RPG in which all of the characters actively pursue the status quo. The Law of a Fall versus Resh'an is pretty straightforward, all things considered. Both are immortal, a Fall doesn't like that, and creates dwellers to sow chaos among countless parallel universes. Knowing dwellers are only vulnerable to solar eclipses, Resh'an equips these universes with solstice warriors. The fate of every universe is then limited to one of two outcomes. Either the dweller takes over, or some solstice warriors ascend to become gods. Overall, a rather crappy system for many worlds involved. In any other RPG, the plot would be about destroying this system, stopping the Fleshmancer permanently. But that's not the case in Sea of Stars. The plot is very much focused on saving two individual planets. Even when face to face with the Fleshmancer, the party lets him escape in both the normal and true endings. I still don't know what to make of this. All I know is that everyone involved is complicit in the continued suffering of many, many more parallel universes. Yes, our lead characters ascend to godhood, but that's exactly what's expected of the system. It's such a bizarre ending in that sense. I would have called it sequel bait, except for the fact that they show the flash forward. We know that this continues for at least another 50 to 60 years, given that Valerian's Ale apparently do not return permanently to their own world within Garl or Teague's lifetime. Maybe I'm missing the big picture, but again this draws uncomfortable comparisons to Chrono Trigger. Lavos is a threat which returns time and time again throughout the ages in some form, eventually destroying the world if not stopped. So the heroes do that, they stop Lavos. The world goes from being in constant peril to becoming safe. But in Sea of Stars the stakes are even higher, putting parallel universes at risk and then not resolving that. Again, someone tell me what I'm missing. Maybe there's some nugget of lore or sly reference in the messenger that ties all this up neatly. Speaking of the messenger, things are doubly strange because breaking a cycle is exactly the plot of the messenger. I get that you might not want to follow the same story beats as your previous game, but when the end result is a story that feels incomplete, I don't know. Because there's nowhere else in this rant where these next couple of things fit nicely, who's this guy? What's he doing? In a game that has a lot of one scene and done characters, this guy kind of takes the cake for sudden plot relevance while remaining almost a total mystery. Show me more with this guy, please. He's cool as hell. One of his arch enemies is Daffy Duck. Why is Daffy Duck in this game? Part of me thinks this guy was going to be another party member at some point in development, and his vestigial inclusion is a product of that. His narrative purpose is to do one thing because he's quote-unquote fast, and then he leaves the story. Also, everyone in this damn game can teleport or fly or is around someone who can do one of those things. Why are characters constantly fretting over how to reach places? There's one scene where everyone falls into a pit and they're like, oh no, how do we get out? Folks, you've got 2 people on your team who can open rifts in space, and you yourselves occasionally fly. Let's move away from the main plot and talk about something else. Sea of Stars backloads virtually all of its side quests into the final act of the game. Once Valere and Zale defeat the Dweller on the Moon, without an eclipse, I guess. I don't really understand, but fine. They gain the ability to free roam and unlock the majority of the side quests. This is kind of fine, and to be expected. The pacing's a little bit strange for these side quests, but sure. The main problem comes when the side quests don't actually mean anything, acting as glorified triggers for the true ending. To explain what I mean, let's look at Beast's side quest. Out of nowhere, Beast, a character who has their own myriad problems when it comes to characterization, announces that they want to be recognized as a gladiator. So you go to the arena and you win a bunch of fights, and now Beast is recognized as a fighter. Hooray! 2 problems. 1, where the hell did that come from? And 2, why weren't Yolanda and the pirates one of the bosses in the arena? That would have been awesome! What a missed opportunity. In the end, pretty much all of the side quests boil down to, why did we do that? Not to fall back on Chrono Trigger again, but let's remember what made those side quests so memorable. They were almost entirely set up throughout the course of the game. Completing those side quests also provided closure to character stories before taking on the final boss. Frog finds closure following his friend's death. The Chancellor's plans against the king are foiled in Marl's side quest. Both are events set up by the main story in some fashion and resolve in a way that advances either plot or characterization. In Sea of Stars, every character-based side quest comes out of nowhere. Yes, even Serai's desire to destroy the queen that was comes out of basically nowhere, and the fight with her is not a culmination of a plot thread. It's just a random fight that you happen to have against a fairly easy boss. Resh'an's quest takes you on a wild goose chase, which culminates in Resh'an revealing he always had the thing you were looking for. I'm sure there's a deeper meaning to that I'm missing, but it sure feels cheap and weird. The actual gameplay component of the side quest is also pretty simple. Serai's boils down to going to a room with a boss in it. Resh'an's is a number of puzzles which, are actually pretty good. Ditto for Valere and Zale. But they still end up feeling a little tacked on. Yes, you're travelling about, but nothing actually happens in those destinations. The second worst offender after Serai's side quest is Garl's, after he revives. The Fish Dungeon is 3 rooms of enemy encounters long, with the rest being filler rooms. It's just empty, and there's not a lot going on. Overall, I think the side quest could have been great if they'd been given more time in the oven and a lot more foreshadowing. But given that major plot points like Living Glass or Garl's Sacrifice are given extremely terse yet blunt foreshadowing, I don't know how the side quests would have fared given the same treatment. I won't comment much on the Flimsy Hammer side quest. I don't know if it's a non-backer's place to comment too much on such a thing, but I will say that it's a truly puzzling move to include the Flimsy Hammers when only a tiny subset of players were expected to actually use them. They provided no end of confusion for me, the kind of player who was absolutely adamant about not looking things up until they've exhausted every possible avenue of investigation. I would personally either have made it clear the Flimsy Hammer side quest was only intended for backers, perhaps by distributing a code to be entered at the start that unlocks the quest, or just not limited it to backers, and otherwise made it available to non-backers after some amount of time. Let me wrap up this section by talking about a side quest that worked really well. Duke Aventry. The premise is set up when you first meet him, and you're eventually called back to help release his spirit from Amaya's grasp. He also has an exposition dump through Teeks, but it feels more like a bonus than a prerequisite for understanding the side quest. You, as a player, know that Duke Aventry is held against his will, and you've known that for the past 20 or so hours of gameplay. so helping him is its own reward. You help a character you already knew about, you're rewarded for doing so, the dungeon doesn't feel like an afterthought, the boss fight is genuinely fun, if you don't stunlock her to death. Overall, brilliant side quest that highlights just how amazing the others could have been if given the same care and attention. The game is very easy, but honestly, I don't have that much to say about that. The developers definitely realised this at some point because they added relics to make the game significantly harder. But when your bonus bosses never get a cast off because Serai and Resh'an can keep them permanently locked down, there's probably some rebalancing needed. That said, it was great fun trying to strategize out the best way to approach every encounter in the game. The apex of this are the arena fights. Unlike most every other encounter in the game, you can't run back to a save point and heal between the arena fights. That in itself is a weird thing. You very rarely have to fight more than one group of enemies in a row because you can always just run back to the campfire. A couple of dungeons have one-way systems which prevent this, but this is the exception rather than the norm. I was starting to wonder why the game didn't just auto-heal you after every fight, before realising there's a relic which does exactly that. This just made me wonder even more why it wasn't something that happened by default, but I suppose those rare cases where you weren't able to retreat to a campfire helped it make sense. Money is another problem in Sea of Stars. You never seem to have enough. It was only at the very end of the game that I hit the money cap, and I hit it in the worst way possible. The game will let you sell items even when you're at the money cap, throwing away the excess money in the process. 2 questions. 1. Why does it let you do this? And 2. Why is there a money cap at all, especially in a game where earning money is pretty hard anyway? Shops overall are odd, selling equipment worse than the stuff you're about to pick up off the floor. In that sense, they largely serve as places to pick up gear you missed. But because money is so scarce, this is rarely worth it when other rare items like recipes are available. And until you unlock the farm in Mirth, you might want to buy ingredients too. As a result, I ended up hoarding money, which is something I almost never do in RPGs. It was interesting because it meant every purchase was considered, but when it came down to choosing between buying a recipe or the ingredients for a food item, I'd feel trapped. Maybe that's the point. This ends up becoming a non-issue in the late game where food is plentiful and your equipment is already the best it can be, but that just reduces shops to places to buy collectibles. All of that said, in the end, I beat Sea of Stars and I had a great time doing it. Yeah, I had the money problems, but I could still progress. Yeah, the fights were easy, but on the whole, they were fun and full of interesting mechanics. As long as you turn off your brain, the plot is a generally approachable standard RPG romp. The side quests fulfill their goal of making your characters overpowered for the last push. The game never becomes too difficult to progress through. The star of the show for Sea of Stars comes from exploration. It's rarely frustrating and it's always gorgeous to look at. In all, I think Sea of Stars could have done with another year or 2 of development, iron out those side quests, do a little bit more rebalancing, flesh out Serai's world. I wouldn't dare suggest rewrite the plot, but anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little rant about Sea of Stars. Catch you later.